Do you love Disco Elysium and narrative-driven RPGs? Then this game is probably for you. What's up, party people? I'm Conduit, and today I'm going to talk about Sovereign Syndicate, a brand new RPG set in steampunk London, with a world similar to ours, but with some key differences. So, unlike other RPGs that you play, you don't just play as one character in this game, you actually play as three different characters that alternate through each chapter. So there is Atticus Daley, a minotaur with a penchant for the party life. Clara Reed, a courtesan slash escort with a story that I would say is as deep as the Thames. And Teddy Redgrave, an Irish dwarf inventor, accompanied by his loyal automaton, Otto. I think that each character is a bit of a prism. They each refract their own unique perspective of this gaslit world in their own way. So I think a cool thing about this game, as soon as you start it up, when you first start playing as each character, you get to decide what archetype they have, allowing you to have some character customization, even though they already are preset characters, and it also adds a lot to the replayability if you do feel like going through the game again, which I imagine you will. So this game attempts to build off the legacy of Disco Elysium, because just like Disco Elysium, this game is entirely dialogue driven with no combat encounters. The only battles that take place is the battle of wits in this game. You know, your words are your weapons. And then also, a lot like Disco Elysium, you use your skills to decide which dialogue options to take. And instead of dice rolls in this game, like a lot of other RPGs and stuff, they use a tarot card system, which is functionally the same system, but it does have a different flavor to it. Like, you'll do an action and then it'll pull a tarot card. And the tarot card will have a number from like 1 to 20 on it, and that'll decide if you get over it or not. But then you also have an automatic succeed tarot card and an automatic fail tarot card. So, along with the tarot cards acting as dice rolls, you can unlock major tarot cards, which are basically kind of like new aspects of your personality. So if you pick dialogue choices enough, you unlock a new one, and that unlocks new dialogue options. Like when you play as the character Atticus, if you continue to choose dialogue options that have you being nice and humble, that will unlock the Magician Tarot card, which then unlocks humility dialogue options. I also think the dialogue in this game is pretty good. It's pretty funny. Like there's an encounter. So in this game, there's an encyclopedia. So when you hover your mouse over highlighted words, it'll tell you what they mean in world. And a character actually remarks how she paid to have her name highlighted because that's how powerful and rich she is. So I think the game's pretty funny, pretty witty. The graphics, they're pretty decent. It doesn't look terrible. It doesn't look great. What does look good, though, is the character portraits and pictures that they have to represent your inner voices. So much like Disco Elysium, they use like this cool abstract type art to represent like a character's ego or slyness or wit when it's talking. So, in this video, as you've heard already, I will continuously compare this game to Disco Elysium. Just because it's really the only comparable game I've ever played, and I'm gonna imagine I'd put the whole house on this. It is the studio's chief inspiration behind this thing. The soundtrack in this game, pretty good. I have no complaints. Again, not that I'm a music critic, I'm not Anthony Fantano, but I think it's pretty good. So I'm not going to cover the story too much in this video because I believe it's best to discover it yourself. But I will talk about the characters and world you inhabit. So first, the world you inhabit, as I mentioned, it is steampunk London, but this world has fantasy elements. Since, as I mentioned, the first character you play as is a minotaur, a lot of fantasy creatures are real. There's cyclopses, dwarves, centaurs, a variety of other creatures. And they all are a part of society with varying degrees of success and discrimination. Everybody except for human faces general discrimination, with werewolves being at the bottom of the barrel and being discriminated against the most due to something happening in London where something got into the water supply and turned a bunch of people into mutated werewolves. So that explains why. And there's also even still human racism still exists. Which, I guess in my opinion, I feel like it wouldn't be as big of an issue if other races exist. But, I digress. I'm not a racism expert. There's also some magic in this world. So the world's base lore is that all this steam engine, steampunk technology came from Atlantis, which was real in this world, and had advanced steam tech, which this world harnesses. Of course, in this world, in the North American continent, they still do use some oil-powered machines. And there's also different countries and uprisings that don't exist in our world that do exist in this one. Like there's an indigenous nation in North America full of Indian and freed black and Caribbean individuals in North America. I find this world really cool and interesting. It's a lot of fun learning tidbits of lore. And since, I mean, I love history a lot, and just comparing it to our world and seeing what changed and what they kept, because they'll mention stuff like Sicily, and then there's also like an ancient dwarven homeland. It's a really cool mesh of the real world and then this cool fantasy world that they developed. And especially, I think that the development team really imagined an incredible world, and I think that this game has a much better chance of getting a sequel than Disco Elysium. So, hopefully, we'll actually get to explore this world more. The gameplay, as I mentioned, does not feature combat. When you play as a character, they each have their own objectives that you work towards by going around a pretty decent sized map of London. There's about 6 different map locations, and then each map location has its own map and shops or whatever in it. So you walk around London interacting with things you see and different characters. And then depending on which character you play as, they're going to have different reactions to things. It's all really cool. Your character also has a mood bar, which determines which dialogue options are available to you. And it's based on what you see and do. So generally, the higher your mood, the better dialogue option comes out. Like if you're real depressed and sad, you're going to act like a dickhead to people and generally be mopey. But if you have a real high attitude, then you'll be nice to people. So as I mentioned, well, as I haven't mentioned, there are no wrong choices in this game, which I love. You're never really locked out of content when things go wrong and a tarot card reading doesn't go your way. You just have to change up your approach and solve the problem another way. So, as I mentioned, don't want to get too deep in the main story, but I think it's best if I just introduce the characters a little bit. The first character you play as and are introduced to is Atticus Daley, a British Minotaur who has a drinking problem. He was raised in an orphanage but ran away at 13 after stealing money from the orphanage to start his new life. He can be played as a brute, or maybe he's a bit more of a quick-witted wordsmith. His motivation is that he wants to find his mother and make enough money to pay off his debts. My personal opinion, I think his storyline is my favorite. Second character is Clara Reed, an American who, after running into troubles with the law, comes to England. She works at a brothel and is the most popular prostitute at the place that she works at. She wants to make enough money to leave London behind for good and start a new life, basically anywhere else. The third character you play as is Teddy Redgrave, a Scottish dwarf, and when you play as him, his automaton sidekick follows him around. He is a war veteran of the Zulu War and is currently a monster hunter. He has no intentions of leaving London or rising above his station. He just wants to make money, hunt monsters, and tinker with technology. So the story of this game starts unconnected but slowly starts moving all of these characters into each other in a combined story, which I love. I love interconnected stories like that with different characters, a lot like GTA 5. Not the best comparison, but so, I mean, overall, I think what this game does is great. It has a very intriguing story. It really ropes you in, and you're just not going to want to stop playing. Along with the characters being great and intriguing, I think the game puts in the proper legwork to make them all feel different. They all speak differently. They all have distinct inner monologues. Like, for example, when you go to different parts of the city, a little loading screen comes up describing what part of the city you're going to. In each different character, they all describe that part of a town in a different way while still conveying the same message. Just for like real life, I just love little details like that. Like they could have just had the standard loading screen describing it, but instead each character thinks about things differently. And I love how the plot of all these different story threads converges and they all weave in and out of each other. I just think the lore and setting of this game is incredible and unique, and it is a major selling point. So some criticisms I have, and maybe not criticisms, but just some warning about what type of game this is. This is not your typical RPG as I mentioned. It is all dialogue driven. If you don't want to read line after line with no break, it's not for you. This game is more akin to an interactive novel than your traditional action RPG that is featured so heavily in the modern gaming landscape. Not every character is voiced. I find that understandable. It's a small studio who just put out their first game, and that might rub some people the wrong way, but it's really not an issue to me. As I mentioned, the graphics are spectacular, but they do the job. I generally didn't encounter any animation errors, but sometimes characters get stuck on certain objects when trying to move around. But it's not really a common occurrence. Probably happened to me about 5 times in my 12 hours of playing. Um, I think, I guess my biggest critique of this game is that it doesn't do enough to distinguish itself from Disco Elysium. I mean, a little bit of a spoiler here, but it follows another detective story, which I understand that that type of story lends itself pretty well to an all dialogue, no combat game. But these two games are some of the only of its kind, and they both have you working as a detective. I don't know. I was hoping that they might pick something else. I think if a sequel is made, they'll get to distinguish themselves a bit more. Decide where they want to take this. But for just this game, it's definitely in the shadow of Disco Elysium. So, I mean, that was Sovereign Syndicate. It's a narrative journey that weaves a complex tapestry of characters in a world that's both familiar and wonderfully bizarre. So, while it does tread pretty closely in the footsteps of Disco Elysium, I think it carves out its own identity with a setting that's as engaging as it is imaginative. I think it's great for those who want to lose themselves in a story, but if you're looking for a traditional RPG, this is not for you. I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think this is great for an indie studio's first game. I think it's great for an all dialogue narrative RPG. But obviously it wasn't perfect. There's still some things to improve on, and I think they'll do that when I hope they choose to work on the sequel. So, that's all I got. Let me know what your thoughts are. Like, comment, subscribe, and remember, Jesus loves you.